Hi there, I'm Amanda Castor with Material Girl Quilts. Today we're going to be making a Lone Star Quilt Block. Now I have loved this block forever, but I had yet to make it until now. I think one of the reasons I hadn't made it is because it often requires the use of Y seams, and that's truly one of my least favorite things to do in quilting. But this block we're making today requires no Y seams, so if you've been putting it off as well, today maybe you'll give it a try. Now before we get started, I also want to point out that in this block it can look completely different depending on fabric placement. In my block here, I decided to use red for the center as well as the outside points, and then navy around the rest of the outside. But there's so many options, as you can see here. And I also will include a downloadable link to a coloring sheet where you can use to plan out your fabric placement for your Lone Star block. Now that you've finished your plan for fabric placement, it's time to get started. Now to make this block, we will be using 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips. So if you'd like to make multiple blocks for an entire quilt, you can pull from a jelly roll. But if you just want to make one star like I did for a wall hanging, you will need just 9 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips. Now this star, once completed, will measure 28 inches from tip to tip on the star. And as you'll see, it's made up of 8 separate diamonds to create the star points. And here is what one of the diamonds from my quilt looks like. And what we'll do to create this diamond is sew together 3 different strip sets. So if you lay it to the side, you'll see that there are essentially 3 different rows. And you will want to sew your 2.5 inch strips together in order of your rows. So row 1 here, you'll make sure that you sew your fabric together with this red on the outside, this blue in the middle, and then this one on the other end. The same for your second row. You'll need to make sure that you sew those strips together in this order, and also for the third row. Now I have already sewn my rows together, and I'll show you how we get those cut. Okay, so now we have our completed strip sets, and as you can see, the first row here is pieced in order with those strips, and then the second row is this set here, and then here's the third row. So you need to pay attention and make sure that your strips are sewn in order. Now we will cut our strip sets. When I pieced these, I decided to stagger them by about 2 to 2.5 inches. Just you will be able to get the amount of sections cut from this strip that you need without doing that, but I like to just waste a little less fabric, and then just in case I make a cutting mistake or something else, there's extra at the end. So when we cut this, we will start by aligning on a ruler the 45-degree line across the bottom, or if your ruler is a little longer, depending on where your 45-degree line is, you can either line it on the bottom of a strip or one of these seams along here, one of the straight lines, and then trim off the excess on the end. And then now we will need to measure in 2.5 inches and cut another 45-degree line. So for my ruler to do that, I flip my ruler over and line up the 45-degree line along the opposite end, and then on 2.5 inches on my ruler, line that up with the edge of your strip set and cut. And there's your first set. You'll repeat this process to cut a total of 8 sections. Okay, so I have all of my segments cut. So now we need to lay them out into the diamond formation that will be for our block, as you can see here. And what we'll have to do then is sew these segments together. So we will place them right sides together, and I have found the best way for matching up these seams so that the points, you have nice crisp points, is to place a pin in this first seam, and I press my seams open so it's easier to see and it lays flatter, about a 1/4 inch within that seam, and then take the next piece that you're going to be matching it up with and put your seam in right, or your pin in right at that seam at a 1/4 inch. Align your edges straight where you'll be sewing. Sorry, it's not easy to do holding up like this. And then stick your pin in. You'll do the same thing for this next seam. So put your pin in at the seam at 1/4 inch. Match it here at 1/4 inch on this seam. And then you will sew 1/4 inch along this edge. And then press your seams open once it's sewn, and then you will sew this last segment here using the same pinning method with a 1/4 inch seam. Now that all of your diamond segments are completed, we now need to cut the background fabric. So you will need to cut a total of 8 10-inch squares that you will then cut on the diagonal to create a total of 16 triangles. Now with those triangles, for each diamond, you will need to find your outside point, which for me will be this red, and you will sew these triangles on the ends of these diamonds. So you're going to take one of the short edges of your triangle and line it up so that it will make one long line here on this side, and you will sew there, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam, and press it open. And then the other triangle you will sew on the other side in the same direction so that you have long lines here, and it'll be the short edges of the triangle up against the diamond, and it makes kind of like a paper airplane. It's like you're sewing wings onto the diamonds. Once that is done and you have it pressed, it will look like this. So to create the block, then you will take 2 of these segments, 2 of your little winged diamond segments, and sew them together along this seam here. So you will pin at your diamonds, place them right sides together, pin here at your diamonds to make sure your points match up, press your seams flat, press them open to lay flat, and that will give you 1/4 of your block. You will repeat this to create the next 3 segments of your star. Once you've finished all 4 corners of your star, you'll sew them together and create this large star with the funny edges. It kind of looks a little bit like a flower. And now we need to trim it so that it's square. So having our background fabric that we cut, it's large enough that you should be able to trim and not cut off the points of your star, which is important. So when you're trimming this up, make sure that you leave at least 1/4 inch on the outside of every point. I decided to leave 1/2 inch beyond my points to let the points float a little bit before I added. For this wall hanging, I ended up cutting a background border that I cut at 1.5 inch strips, and then this floral border I cut at 3 inches. So the wall hanging itself finishes at roughly 36 inches square. So again, you can create more of these Lone Star blocks from a jelly roll and put them all together for a quilt top, make a wall hanging, a table topper, whatever you'd like to do. But I do hope that you are inspired to try this block yourself, since there's no Y seams required. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.